Okay, I wanted to go back and I kind of went through phosphate quickly, didn't really mention it, but I do want to point out a couple of things on phosphate. Remember that it has a reciprocal relationship with calcium, so that if phosphate is high, calcium tends to be low and vice versa. In order to maintain the right amount of phosphate, the kidneys have to be functioning, and same goes with many different electrolytes. The kidneys have to be working to either hold on to or excrete enough of the electrolytes. So look back at causes of electrolyte imbalances. We talked about sodium. It can be diluted if there's hypervolemia. It can be concentrated if there's hypovolemia and we don't have enough fluid. So go back and look at those. It's also mentioned in your study guide as well as your textbook. If you took good notes in the lecture in class on fluid and electrolytes, I literally covered everything that you'll need to know. So I would really encourage you to go back and review that lecture, review your notes. And potassium, one thing I want to pick up on potassium, we talked about the drug digoxin and how it's given for arrhythmias or dysrhythmias. Remember what happens in the case of hypokalemia. If the patient is low potassium, it tends to increase the risk for dig toxicity. Digoxin has a narrow therapeutic range and blood levels have to be tested periodically. So if a patient is hypokalemic and they're also on digoxin, that would alert you to want to be getting a dig level and find out if they are getting toxic or have toxicity related to the dig. Also, as far as checking electrolyte levels, remember what test that's going to be on will be the basic metabolic panel, or BMP. Something else to think about. Just and I've got here, you can see milk. Milk is high in phosphate, so that's something else that you want to remember are the foods that contain a lot of phosphate. Dairy in particular is one. So if we do have, say we have a renal patient that's on a low phosphate diet, we would want to teach them to avoid dairy or limit. So I want to just talk about the different IV fluids again, just very briefly, because it is listed in your study guide. So go back and pick that up. We run IV fluids when oral intake is not adequate or when losses have occurred for, because of accidents, injuries, wound, dehydration. So go back in your study guide and look at each one of those. I'm not going to read those because it's all listed for you in the study guide. So go back and look at those and remember, or, and just review the different types and what they do. How do they affect cells? Where does that fluid end up? Remember with the isotonic, in particular, it expands only the extracellular fluid. There's no net loss or gain from within the cells. There's not going to be that shift. And these are, this tonicity, we talked about tonicity quite a bit, and as far as that goes, it means the amount of particles that are in a solution. If they have a lot of particles, like it's 3% saline, then it's going to be hypertonic because it has more particles in it. Lactated ringers, remember that one contains electrolytes. D5.5 is hypertonic, but remember D5W, which is dextrose 5% in water, is isotonic. But remember that one does not contain electrolytes. So if we need to be replacing electrolytes because the patient has lost them because of say they're having nasogastric suction and we need to replace electrolytes, we're going to want to run lactated ringers. We wouldn't want to run, D5W or something that's not going to replace electrolytes. So go back through there and be familiar with what each of these do. We talked about colloids. They stay in vascular space. They increase osmotic pressure. One of the ones that is used to pull fluids back into the intravascular space is albumin, which comes in different strengths. 25% albumin would be one that would be used if a person has third spacing, such as in ascites. They may use the albumin to help to pull fluid back into the intravascular space, because remember, when we have third spacing, we've got fluid in spaces where it cannot be used by the body, and it's not easy to get that out of there. Okay, so just want to go through a couple of other things here. Again, with the let's see, the hypo and hypervolemias. You know, it's in your textbook in a table. I'm not going to read through them. It's right in there for you, but just make sure you know the difference in signs and symptoms and possible causes. You know, what are the possible causes of too much fluid versus not enough fluid? Look at that. Remember blood pressure. If a blood pressure is getting too low, we're not going to have good perfusion. The patient is at risk of going into shock. You know, you're going to see things like, you know, decreased urine output, skin tinting, those things that I mentioned earlier. Remember daily weights and why that is important. Again, remember the different diuretics that we talked about. The potassium sparing and the potassium wasting, and why that would be important in a patient who is having an issue with potassium. Go back and review that information. Let's see. And then again, with your acid-base imbalances, just the biggest thing I want to say, the biggest way you're going to help yourself on that is to go through that book on ABGs. Go through those practice problems and make sure that you understand them and know how to interpret them. We spent a lot of time on that in class and nobody stayed after for help, so I'm assuming that you have it down. But if you do want to, you know, have me explain that again or go over it more, then just make an appointment with me for next week and I would be happy to do that. There will be a study guide coming up well, it won't be a study guide, I'm sorry, we already have multiple study guides. You've got the study guide that you worked on the day that we didn't have class, that Monday. You've also got the fluid and electrolyte practice questions from Kahoot quizzes. I've given you that. I've posted that along with the answers and the rationales. So make sure you are looking back and seeing if you can answer those questions, and then if not, you know, look at the rationales for them and review that information. Go back and read through the practice test that we did after, you know, as we were watching the video on fluid and electrolytes. There'll be information in there that is also helpful to you. And of course, the flashcards as well. I would literally cut those out and test yourself and see if you can put the pieces together with each different condition. But there's, you know, everything was well covered. There's not going to be any surprises or anything that we did not talk about. So as I said, if you did not get notes, make sure that you get notes from somebody that was in class that day and go through. I've given you multiple resources to understand this information. So go back through that and use your time wisely to study. The exam blueprint will be posted in the next few days, and that will, you know, also direct you. But I mean, I can just tell you what you're going to use is the textbook, the ATI book, and all of the study materials that I've provided, as well as the lecture and lecture notes. So, you know, start studying now. You've got, you know, multiple things that you can use as reference material. As far as skin goes, that chapter is extremely straightforward. if there's something you don't understand, please let me know. But otherwise, there's really nothing to understand. I mean, impetigo is impetigo. I mean, just go back and review that lecture, review that information. If you have specific questions, I would be happy to address those. But otherwise, everything that you will need was covered that day in lecture. So make sure you go back over that. And again, if you missed, have somebody share their notes with you and go over that. And once again, make an appointment with me if there's anything you don't understand, but you need to do your part and apply yourself and really study for this information, because you'll see it on the exam, and then some of the stuff you'll see again on the final. So good luck.